Hi there, it's Larold, and today I'm making another video talking about Mythic Plus dungeons in Dragonflight Season 3. I've been doing a lot of them, I've really been enjoying them. We're going to go over the recent Mythic Plus changes and restructure the Mythic Plus tier list we made before based on those changes. That's the tier list of the dungeons themselves, not any of the classes. There haven't really been that many class changes. That'll also be based on playing through all the dungeons on a couple of affix sets now as well. Then I'll finish up by talking about the optimal levels for running Mythic Plus so that you can gear up quickly. So let's just get started. Blizzard made some big changes to dungeons at the start of week 2. I really wanted to test them before putting out a video, but due to Thanksgiving and I don't know, just letting time get away from me, by the time I'd finished doing all the testing I felt like I needed to, it was basically just about the start of week 3. I expected really big changes with week 3, class tuning, dungeon changes, so why not wait until week 3 and see what the changes would be? They were basically nothing. And then it turned out that Blizzard had actually made some good stealth nerfs to dungeons in week 3. They just forgot to put them in the initial hotfix write-up. So cool. They also made some very minor changes to DPS specs. Nothing for tanks. We're talking like 5% more damage for Shadow Priest, AF, and Destro locks, and then some reworks for Frost DK. And that's basically it. People were understandably a little upset because that's not enough in terms of class tuning at this point. But there's a reason for that. And the reason is exactly what everyone thought it would be with the patch releasing at the time of year this is. Thanksgiving happened. Everyone at Blizzard was off work for most of last week. They came in for Monday and had, one day to get class tuning in for the week? That's not enough time for all the testing required to put that stuff into a live game environment. And they even put out a blue post addressing those concerns, basically saying all of this except without using Thanksgiving as an excuse. And, you know, it's all pretty much true. So in any case, Blizzard has acknowledged that they plan to make a much larger batch of tuning changes for classes on December 5th, which would be the next reset. I would expect that if you're playing an underperforming spec right now, you're probably going to get some love, maybe not quite as much as you feel you need. And the opposite is probably also true, but you never know. So now let's talk about dungeon changes. All right, here we have the week 2 changes, and we'll just start with those first. These are already in, have been in for a week, so most people are probably pretty familiar with them, so we'll kind of move through. But basically the idea on Blizzard's end was that Murozond's Rise and Throne of the Tides were too hard and they needed to be nerfed, and atal'dazar was way too easy and it needed to be buffed. And this is pretty consistent with what we had kind of thought already. Like, this is our tier list. I pulled it back up. This is how I had rated everything out. You know, Everbloom and Murozond, a little too hard. Throne of the Tides, very, very much too hard. atal'dazar, way too easy. Pleasantly easy. Not a problem that it was so easy, but definitely easier than everything else. And so Blizzard kind of went buck wild when it comes to atal'dazar. They increased the force count required. Now this is pretty easy to get around. Basically what you do is there's a pack in the middle of the dungeon that has several mobs in it that are going to be in here as well. Dinomancer, Kisho, Talonja, and Monzumi. And normally you would skip around these guys, but basically now you just do them. And as long as you were doing a route that got you 100% before, you add those guys in, you're still at 100%. You do one extra pack worth of trash, but it's not too bad. And they have reworked that trash somewhat, so we'll just start with them. Kisho does a little bit less damage for her random target shots, which is fine. Basically, you just want to focus interrupt on her. That's all normal. Talonja has a charge that she normally would target on players and you couldn't dodge it and it would be a stun. Very annoying. Now she seems to only target it on the tank. It says still in the ability description that it chooses a random target. I think that's just something that'll need to be fixed in a hotfix later on, or maybe a patch. The wording there I think is incorrect. It basically only ever goes on me now as the tank. So, you know, you wait for her to cast it, or she'll choose to cast it at you. You'd step to the side, it misses, rinse, repeat, pretty basic. And then Monzumi, it's just like a AoE damage thing that hits the whole group, healer mechanic, basically. Healer has to heal through it, that's it. The other changes have been a little bit less pleasant. Like, I don't know why these are lumped under a Priestess Alunza change. They're clearly trash. A lot of these are. The Dazar'alai, Juggernaut, and Augur are also trash, and they were made Well, the Augurs were made more dangerous and the Juggernauts were made less dangerous. The Toxic Swords, which killed a lot of people with their poison claws, that's just completely removed, so that's fine. but Alunza and Spirit of Gold both made more difficult. Yasma's the real issue here. I think if they hadn't made this change to Yasma, the racking pain no longer being interruptible, I think that atal'dazar would still be maybe the easiest dungeon, maybe like in the higher end of dungeons. This is basically all on your healer. It is reflectable, so this is kind of a very small accidental buff to warriors, like DPS warriors, since she only casts racking pain on warriors. That is kind of nice, but for the most part, I really hate this change because, you can't dispel it, you can't interrupt it, and I was used to interrupting it always, so she basically just added a huge amount of damage, and I think around a 20 or so, it's something like 400,000 damage up front, and then 200-something thousand damage every 2 seconds afterward for, I don't remember how long, some amount of time. It does a lot of damage, it puts a lot of stress on your healer, and now there's nothing that can be done about it. But if it goes on a warrior and they hit spell reflection, free couple million damage. Nothing bad about that. Other than that, not great. I definitely think these changes made atal'dazar a lot harder on tyrannical weeks and a little harder on fortified weeks, but not like impossible. All right, now in my previous video, I had said that I thought Murozond's Rise was one of the harder dungeons. It certainly had too short of a timer. I thought it needed about 3 more minutes. Maybe that was a bit much, but I really did think it needed more. Blizzard's initial pass on this was just to reduce the damage reduction shield, the damage absorb shield on tier by a decent amount. And then Chrono Lord Deus's health and his unavoidable damage, the infinite corruption damage, by a bit. I think this is the mechanic he uses in the final phase that does some group-wide damage and then also leaves a bunch of pools on the ground. That's reduced a bit. And then they nerfed some of the trash mobs a little bit. Not all that much, but, every bit counts. Now, Throne of the Tides was really like a nightmare because of the final hallway. And this is such a vague phrase, reduce the total number of spawns and how improved their consistency on spawning in the final hallway, essentially. This was not as ambitious as I hoped. I really hoped they would just massively reduce the number of mobs in that hallway. But I gotta say, as of last week, it was a lot more manageable. There was certainly a lot fewer mobs than there were before. They could have probably cut it down even by another 50% from where it is, and it would feel fine, but it's okay now. It's not insane like it was in the first week. The nerf to the Snapdragons and the Aqua Mages has been very noticeable and very appreciated. It definitely made them a lot less dangerous. And, the other trash mobs, they're a little bit less dangerous as well. The main issue in that dungeon after you got through the hallway was that you then had this insane boss at the end ready to just basically delete the tank and delete all of the available space on the ground. And it is way easier to clean up that stuff. You have more time to clean it up, just a lot less damage in the fight. And also when you pull the boss, he doesn't immediately blast you in the face with Foul Bolt until you're dead. There's an 8-second initial cool up on that should have been in there from the beginning, but at least it's in there now. And he spawns his ads closer to him, so it's a little easier to pick them all up. A lot better situation here. In Galakron's Fall, the Risen Dragons, the one dangerous mob in that dungeon, had their pulsing AoE damage changed from a 2-second to a 3-second timer, so basically cut by 50%. That's pretty good. And I didn't even really remember coalesced moments, so that's great. They certainly are a lot less dangerous now than they were before. The only other real changes notably here are the Felspite Dominator's sick bats only command up to 4 bats at a time to attack a target. Previously it was unlimited, so if you'd been in that Blackrock Hold gauntlet for a while and you had 50 bats up, they could go sick bats on the priest, and then unless you have Blessing of Protection, the priest is instantly dead by being hit by 25, 30 bats at once. 4 bats, not a problem. This right here, Oakheart's Crushing Grip throw damage reduced by 15%. Oakheart is one of the most dangerous bosses in Mythic Plus to tanks, and so Crushing Grip is the mechanic he uses to just delete tanks' health pools. But this is just the throw damage. This is the damage at the end of his combo. The Crushing Grip itself also could stand to have its damage reduced by 25%, really. But yeah, this really wasn't much of a change for anybody. And Wakecrest Manor, no real changes here. That's all fine. Then after this change set, which was pretty good, I would say, other than maybe the atal'dazar damage increases. Specifically, the Yasma change wasn't so great. But other than that, I think everything there was pretty good. There were a couple of little hot fixes just to remove some cheese. Line of sighting stuff in Throne of the Tides, some more line of sight, and like cheesy behavior, anti-snap, reverse snapping on some mobs has been fixed out of Everbloom, Throne of the Tides, that kind of thing. And then there were some unannounced changes this week, including something that I was hoping for, an increase to the Dawn of the Ancients, or Dawn of the Infinite Rise of Murazond timer. It went from 35 minutes all the way up to 36, which, okay, I guess that's great. I really think it could have gone up further, but that's fine. Tyr's health was reduced by almost over 14%, 14.5%. That's pretty good. That definitely also helps with the timer. Anytime you cut a boss's health pool down by a pretty substantial chunk, that will certainly give you some more time. So in a sort of a way, it's more like, a minute and change, minute and a half or something worth of time that's been saved between these two changes. Not bad. The time lost battlefield is such an irritating area. The fact that room is filled with mobs that, like, your Avenger shield will bounce to them. A lot of, like, target capped AoE heals and damage skills will go to just random mobs in that area. It's very, very annoying. They really should turn off once you've killed all the trash in there, at least. For them to be in there and soaking up ability hits during the boss fight is very frustrating. Trying to hit like Divine Toll so you can silence in the caster mobs that spawn throughout the fight, and then instead they're just hitting like random fake trash mobs and wasting hits. Very annoying. And thankfully, Chronolord Deus has had two of his most dangerous abilities reduced substantially. The Temporal Breath, the tank frontal cone, has been cut down by 25%, which is exactly what it needed, and it's like surprisingly aggressive. I am surprised by this change. Pleasantly, but still very surprised that they went this hard on it. And then Infinity Nova, the damage mechanic, what is this? This is the orbs that drop. That has been reduced massively from a basically instant guaranteed wipe if two hit to substantially less lethal, potentially survivable if two of them hit in a row. That's pretty good. And then one of the other tank mechanics, I would say, like, if I really had to pin down 3 tank mechanics to delete tanks in this season, it would be the grip on Oakheart that had the one component of it nerfed, but the base component of it, the base grip and throw, still hits insanely hard. Then the second would be the breath from Chronolord Dios, and then third would be the charge from Ancient Protectors. The charge has had its damage reduced by 25%. The secondary discharge that it leaves on the ground has been reduced by 25%. And the missile time, the spawn time from when the charge hits until the pools form on the ground, has been increased from 1.5 seconds to 2. This means that there's enough time for you to get out of the pool before it spawns and starts ticking, and that's also great. Even if you take one tick, it's not like instant death, especially with it being nerfed by 25%. But just all told, I would say those 3 fights are the ones that I've really noticed this season thus far, especially on Tyrannical Week, that really were trying to kill me. Chronolord Dios, Oakheart, and Ancient Protectors. Chronolord Dios and Ancient Protectors have been nerfed in their main tank killing mechanic by 25%. Oakheart, not yet, maybe next week. And Latosius has had his Shadow Bolt damage variance removed. I think, the issue there is that his Shadow Bolt could hit fairly hard, and then with a 15% damage variance, going up by an extra 15% could one-bang people, just in a really unfair, annoying way. So, getting rid of that's probably for the best. So now let's look at our tier list again. This was our previous version of the tier list, and if I pull up some of these changes here, kind of to have them by each other. atal'dazar is definitely not an easy dungeon anymore, not in a category of its own at all. I would say it's probably under Waycrest Manor and Darkheart Thicket for me on Tyrannical Weeks. Yasma has a tendency to be a real group killer. I think on Fortified Weeks, it's pretty much fine, pretty competitive dungeon, but definitely not in a league of its own at all anymore. And I think Blackrook Hold and Galakron's Fall are in that range. I think Waycrest Manor on Tyrannical Weeks probably is up there too. It's a pretty amazing Tyrannical dungeon. It was pretty forgiving on bursting as well, because even though there is so much trash in that dungeon, most of it doesn't burst. And so it's pretty easy to do huge pulls in Waycrest Manor and then only have like maybe 3 to 5 bursting mobs in a pack full of like 20, 25 mobs, and that felt really great. That's basically the opposite of how the experience was in the Everbloom, where I think the Everbloom is probably great for dungeons or for weeks that don't have on-death affixes that are a real problem. The first 2 weeks were sanguine and bursting weeks, and so the Everbloom was really brutal because there are so many pulls in there where you'll do one pull, you're not pulling anything extra in, and there will be 5 flowers that all burst or sanguine or do some sort of on death mechanic. And then also there will be at least 1 caster, maybe 2, or like a caster and a melee guy. We're talking 7, 8 mobs in a single pull. If you try to then do a double pull, you're talking 14 to 18 mobs at once. And on a week like bursting, that's a real problem. But that being said, with the nerfs to Everbloom, the worst boss in there by far has been nerfed pretty substantially. I think Murozond's Rise has gotten like multiple rounds of nerfs. I think that they've probably moved up in quality. I don't think they're nearly as bad as they were. And I think Throne of the Tides has actually moved up substantially, like maybe even more so. I think Murozond is probably still the worst, or I think Murozond probably is the worst dungeon now. I think Throne of the Tides has probably jumped over it with all of the changes that happened to it last week. It really wound up being a lot less painful of a dungeon overall. I would say on Tyrannical Week, once those changes were in, that first week was pretty brutal. And the Tyrannical Week wasn't nearly as bad. It was actually kind of a fun dungeon. I think that the design of the dungeon is pretty satisfying as well. Like, it's basically a straight line. You do almost all of the trash in the entire dungeon, and you're only at like 104%, 103%, something like that. That's pretty great. Whereas Murozond, I don't know, there's a lot of RP, there's kind of some standing around waiting, and just some really brutal bosses in there that aren't great even with the changes that they made this week. Like, again, I thought they needed to add 3 minutes and they added 1. Not the greatest. Other than that, I feel pretty good about this. I really do still like Galakron's Fall a lot, even though it has a lot of RP. I think the mobs in it are substantially better. Just a lot less brutal. I think the main thing here is just how much I've really come to like Blackrook Hold. I think, man, what a great dungeon. And also, I did a little digging. I did a little research and time walking to compare those rocks, because that was a point of contention in the last video. Are the rocks faster on Mythic? Are they faster than I remember? And the answer is absolutely. I'm going to throw these up on the screen here side by side. Mythic rocks on one side and time walking rocks on the other, and that is a substantial difference between those rocks. There are so many questions about these rocks in my mind. Where are they coming from? These are huge rocks, right? And very little guys at the top of the stairs. Now they say like, we're sorry, we'll stop. But are they even big enough to throw those rocks? And also, like, if they are throwing the rocks, where's the stockpile of rocks at the top of the stairs? Where do the rocks go when they get to the bottom of the stairs? It looks like they just disintegrate when they hit the bottom of the staircase. Really, it causes a lot of issues with suspension of disbelief when it comes to those rocks. So having done all the dungeons on both Fortified and Tyrannical weeks, and, we haven't done them on every single possible affix set, but, we've done a couple of weeks of them now. I feel like this is a fair ranking, at least where dungeons stand right now. I still think Murozond is one of the harder dungeons. I think Everbloom and Throne of the Tides are definitely also in that harder group. They're probably all about on par with each other in terms of difficulty. Definitely they stand out as being like quite a lot more difficult than, say, Blackrook Hold and Galakron's Fall. I think atal'dazar really depends on how organized your group is and whether it's Fortified or Tyrannical week. Like, Yasma really stands out as being a group killer, but I think most of the rest of the bosses in there are okay. I don't really love the second boss, but in general, I think they're okay, and it's very familiar for people. It used to be a fan favorite, so that really makes it quite a bit better. I think on Fortified weeks, it may be more like a top tier dungeon still, but even in the worst case scenario, it's still not all too bad. All right, now let's talk about gear. There is a Reddit post that was made, I guess a couple of weeks ago, with this very helpful chart that details all of the item levels that you get from various content, and really the main useful thing here is just kind of having sort of a visual indicator of like what levels of Mythic Plus dungeons drop certain types of crests and certain item levels of gear from the dungeon or from the Great Vault, the weekly reward. And so this basically, along with the rework of the affix system in Season 2, gives us 3 breakpoints of levels that you want to do Mythic Plus at over and over again if you're trying to maximize your gear. You know, you're not thinking about rating here, you're just thinking about like, how do I gear up a character? And those 3 breakpoints are +6 if you're on a character that's pretty undergeared. You know, you're talking about like a new character, or maybe you're coming back and you didn't really play much in Season 2, or you haven't played since Season 1 or whatever. Just sort of low B keys. I mean, you can do 2s, right? But at some level, a +2 over and over again is not going to be particularly rewarding. Not that +6s are either. You're basically getting LFR level gear, but it is a spammable, infinitely doable level of content that gives you rewards. And the reason you would want to do 6s instead of, say, 7s or whatever is 7 is when you get that first affix. You get Entangling or Incorporeal or whatever. So you can, you know, even on an easy affix, you can still do a dungeon that doesn't have an affix a lot easier than you can one that does. And the difference in the gear level is 3 item level. You're still basically getting the same veteran track gear. Still getting Drake crests. So spamming +6s early on in gearing, that's a pretty good approach. Then you basically just take that same philosophy and go all the way up to 13s for your next round of stuff. Now, I mean, you could do stuff in between if you feel like it, but 13s are where you're sitting on 1 affix just like you would from 7 all the way up to 13. Just 1 affix. You're getting Drake crests. Or I'm sorry, you drop it. You're getting Worm crests actually from those Mythic Plus. So you're able to upgrade gear that's in the champion track all the way up to, or champion or heroic track all the way up to that 476 item level. Pretty good gear at that point. You're getting gear that drops in this champion track. So you're able to upgrade it, you know, use some of those Drake crests you got from +6s. And yeah, that's basically what I have been doing on most of my sort of well-geared characters from last season that I'm not maining this season. I've just been kind of slamming 13s on them for a while, get a decent baseline of gear, and then plan to sort of play on them more once I've finished progression and kind of felt like I've hit the end of the line for gearing up my higher level characters. Now, if you're trying to put the finishing touches on a character, you're really trying to hit that max level of gear, 18s are kind of the minimum level of where you want to spam out dungeons. 18s will give you hero track gear as your end of dungeon reward. Technically, 17s are the minimum you have to do for that, but 18s also get you mythic track reward gear out of the Great Vault. Now, by doing like 19s, you can get 470 item level hero track gear. By doing 20s, you can get the same, 470 eye level hero track gear out of the weekly cache, and you can get 483 myth track gear. Basically, you're getting a free upgrade by doing a couple higher key levels, but it's a little bit more work. People tend to make a little bit more mistakes in higher keys. And, if you're just really wanting to maximize your chances of success and kind of optimize for speed, spamming out 18s is a pretty good approach for maximizing your gear at those higher levels. But those are the 3 main breakpoints. 6s so that you're not getting any affixes other than fortified or tyrannical. 13s so that you're only dealing with 1 affix. And then 18s for kind of maximizing high level gear. All right, I think that pretty much covers it. Like I said, I've really been playing a lot of Mythic Plus this season, enjoying Mythic Plus a lot this season. It's definitely a good Mythic Plus season. I have to say I came into it a little disappointed that Blizzard hadn't done any major redesign or rebalancing to affixes like they did in Season 2. I was really thrilled, really pleased by their decision to do that with Season 2, and I thought they had said that they were going to be doing more of the same with Season 3 and so on, and it was definitely a big disappointment to me that they hadn't. But getting in here in these new dungeons and seeing them all a lot, I have to say I really am appreciating all the changes they made in Season 2, quite frankly a lot more than I did in Season 2, and it's pretty good. I'm definitely looking forward to more changes to dungeons and classes in the coming weeks. And I am hoping that they do something with affixes in Season 4 and in War Within. I think just generally, if I had to say anything, like less is definitely more when it comes to affixes. I think a lot of people probably feel the same way, that you feel like in a lot of cases you play the affixes more than the dungeons themselves. Like if bursting didn't exist, I might like Everbloom a whole lot more. I might think it's a great dungeon. I doubt it, but I would probably dislike it less at least. So I would love to see more changes done to affixes, but either way, enjoying Mythic Plus a lot. Definitely think that they're on the right track here, and just hoping for more going forward. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.